Let me start by welcoming everybody to the official kickoff for the CBSR program. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is CBSR's first official webinar of the year entitled 9 Emerging ESG Trends Rocking 2022. I promise you, over the next hour here, you're going to get a lively and provocative discussion with 3 extraordinary leaders and ESG experts. So please, free yourself of distractions and take this time to absorb and reflect on the high-level issues that might rock you off your game if they're not already on your radar. And before we go any further, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Mohkinstsis. That's the Blackfoot name for the place we commonly know as Calgary, which is located in the Treaty 7 region and traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation, Stoney Nakoda, and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. There's no doubt you've probably heard countless land acknowledgements over the past several years, and maybe you've even delivered a few yourself. They can sometimes feel like more like a formality than an act of reconciliation. My friend and CBSR board member, Annie Corver, recently reminded me that reconciliation is a path, not a destination, because the work of expanding access to justice and inclusion are never truly done. But here we are, 7 years out from the publication of the Truth and Reconciliation Report and the 94 calls to action. And many of us have yet to read the document. So never mind the destination, most of us don't know where the path begins or that we have a critical role to play on that path. And I totally get it. No judgments here. I didn't read them myself until recently. 94 calls to action is a lot. But how shameful is it that it requires that many actions simply to enable Indigenous people to equally participate in the education system, healthcare system, the justice system, to have reasonable access to clean water, social services, property rights, frankly, all of the things that we take for granted every single day. So my call to action is to read the 94 calls to action or review them if you've already read them. I believe we can all do more, myself included, to educate ourselves as much as we can about the truth of what's been done in Canada in the name of assimilation, and share it and show allyship, even at the risk of not getting it perfect, and take every opportunity to acknowledge the privilege and responsibility that we're inheriting so that we can take action toward co-creating a modern and inclusive society and economy that works for everybody. On the next slide, you'll see that I'm continuing with the theme of inclusion in my introduction here, because I'd also like to acknowledge that February is Black History Month. And the theme this year is February and Forever, which reminds us about the need to take time throughout the year, not just in the month of February, to recognize and rediscover the Black voices and influences that our history books have often muted. And if you haven't already read The Skin We're In by Desmond Cole, I highly recommend this modern and insightful look at the Black experience in Canada today. I certainly learned a lot from it. In the next slide, I have one more final acknowledgement to make before we kick off the rest here. And it's because I want to thank the Globe team, who has handled all the logistics for this webinar, which has made our job super easy. And that's why we're calling this a Powered by Globe event. Next month, Globe will hold its major forum in Vancouver from March 29th to 31st. It will be both an in-person and a virtual event. So if you're able to be there in person, we'd love to reconnect with you. That's right, like in-person events, right? After 2 years of being apart, amazing opportunity. If you're unable to do it in person, no worries. You also have another great option to participate virtually. CBSR will be hosting a number of in-person events in addition to the already amazing Globe program in Vancouver. And all of our members, of course, will have access to the CBSR hosted sessions that are being planned. We've set aside 30 minutes at the end of this webinar for members to stay on, learn more about the CBSR 2022 program that is being rolled out. However, if you're not a member, but you are considering becoming a member, please stick around. So that's immediately after the top of the hour, where you'll have a chance to learn more and ask questions about our 2022 program. But between now and then, we'll hear from 3 highly accomplished sustainability professionals on what they believe will be the main sustainability trends that will shape and rock 2022. You're strongly encouraged to use the chat throughout to add your comments, and use the Q&A function to ask your questions directly to the speakers, and we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. But first, before I introduce them, I have a poll that I'd like to engage you on right now. So the question is, what do you think the biggest ESG trends will be in 2022? I want to get your thoughts on this. So please reply now, and let's hear from you what you believe will be the biggest trends rocking 2022. I'll give you a moment to do that. And Victoria from Globe is handling that poll, so I'll leave it to Victoria to let me know when we've got a good sample size to get to work from. All right. How are we doing, Victoria? Can we close that poll and see the results? All right. So yeah, large, kind of overwhelming number of you believe that net zero targets, and in particular interim targets, will be a major focus for the year. Really interesting results. I see that it's kind of sprinkled throughout and around mental health and wellness, sustainable procurement, Indigenous reconciliation and circularity, but certainly that net zero focus is on the minds of many people. Good news, you know, a bit of a spoiler alert, we certainly will touch on that. And that's probably no surprise to many of you who have been engaged with CBSR and Globe. On the next slide, I would like to shine a light on the speakers that we are really fortunate to have with us here today. I'll give a very brief summary of who they are and then introduce them one at a time and invite them to share with us their ESG trends. And the first one is going to be Alana Boyd. She is the Senior VP and Chief Sustainability Officer at Sun Life Financial. Nisha Agarwal is the Director of Sustainability for Quadrille Property Group. And Ted Ferguson is the Managing Director of CBSR and Chief Sustainability Officer for the constellation of organizations that include the Delphi Group, Globe Series, Leading Change, and CBSR. So first up, we have Alana Boyd. Alana, please make your video scene there, and as you're doing that, I'll just let you know that in her role, Alana reports to Sun Life's President and CEO and is advancing the investment management and insurance giants' sustainability and climate change vision and strategy. Lucky for us, she also recently joined the CBSR Board of Directors. We're really happy to have her. And she brings a unique background that includes time in government as well as the mining sector. Over to you, Alana.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Lear, for that great introduction. You know, it's always hard kicking off a discussion like this, but interestingly, the first issue I'm going to touch on, only 9% of you actually thought was a top trend for this year. So I like to be controversial sometimes. So I'll pick an issue that maybe and see if I can sway some of you on mental health. So, I think we all heard of the word languishing in 2021. We know that the pandemic is having severe impacts on Canadians' mental health. We've got lots of studies showing that over half of Canadians continue to suffer from mental health challenges as a result of the pandemic. We know that emotional, mental, and physical fatigue are top issues affecting Canadians, followed by financial concerns. Sun Life has a unique perspective in this because we are a group benefits provider. So we actually see the effects of this across our clients and across some of you might be plan members as part of your workplace benefits. And we're seeing that mental health is the leading claim type, representing over 30% of claims. But we also know that 60% of Canadians that actually have access to mental health through their benefits plans aren't accessing the support that they have available to them. So there's a lot going on here. And we also know that mental health is going to be with us for many years. So while maybe I'm stretching a bit to say it's going to be a top trend of 2022, I think it's something as a society we're going to be grappling with for years to come following the pandemic and the impacts on our children, our elders, our families, and the collective, trauma that's happened from the pandemic. So that's why I put it as one of the key issues and trends, because I think society, businesses, we have to grapple with it about our employees. We have to create safe places to address and talk about mental health issues. Companies have to think about it with their workforces. All levels of government need to think about the impacts on mental health. So I really do believe this is a big issue that we have to address and will become more important as we see the lingering effects from the pandemic. Theme number 2, taking a stance on social issues. I wrote down here 29% agreed that they thought this was an issue. I think we've really seen over the last few years, again, talking about the impacts from COVID-19 on vulnerable groups, the conviction of Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd, and exposure of human rights abuses in supply chains. There are far-reaching implications on big issues that business and society have to grapple with. And there is increased pressure on companies to take a public stand on these social issues, including human rights, discrimination, racism, DE&I for employees and shareholders, and all of our collective stakeholders. It's not enough for companies and CEOs to stay silent on these issues anymore. We know that employees in the US are pushing for employers to address these issues. The 2022 Edelman Trust Barometer also clearly showed that societal leadership is now a core function of business. 60% of employees want their CEO to speak out on controversial issues, and 80% of the general population want CEOs to be personally visible when discussing public policy with external stakeholders. So we also know the Institutional Shareholder Services, ISS, had an increased focus on DE&I shareholder proposals, and GRI has strengthened its human rights related standards. So there's a lot going on in this space, and the expectation for companies to not weigh in or not take a position, particularly with their employees, is not really tenable anymore. So there's increasing pressure there for companies to take a position. And then my third issue is, a little bit related to the other two around mandatory disclosures, but it comes back to this, view that there is an enhanced need for transparency. And, net zero and climate change is a very obvious trend for 2022. And we know that companies must play a role. We know that society and governments, we all have to collectively increase our action. And part of the way that we can understand and have trust and not be worried about greenwashing is through mandatory disclosures. So, it's imperative that companies report on what they're doing on climate change. We're seeing the beginning of that being mandatory In Canada, we have one instrument, the CSA proposed instrument. We've seen a little bit of this in the UK. The SEC has pulled back a bit. We're still waiting there, but it's percolating around the globe bit by bit for companies to need to report on climate change in line with the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And that need for comparable disclosures and transparent reporting is huge for society to be able to understand what are companies doing, is it credible, and how do we compare that across companies, and then make decisions at a collective, larger, global, societal, and public policy space. But we can't do that if we don't have the information. So it really does start with disclosures. And I think, Lior, that's 5 minutes. So I will cut it off there and look forward to more discussion.
Awesome. That was terrific. And thank you for being so concise with your comments. Lots of really interesting stuff there. Just a couple of really quick clarifications, though. Somebody in the chat asked, was that Canadian data that you were presenting?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And
most of it was Canadian. With respect to mental health claims, that was Canadian data.
Okay, yeah, and I think that was what the question was in reference to. And you talked about the fact that a large percentage of the claims post-pandemic have been mental health related. There was a question in the Q&A about whether, like what kind of a spike was that compared to previous, before the pandemic?
That's a good question. I have to come back on that, the exact data, but it is a spike, and it's a noticeable spike. We know that those are coming in as part of the short-term disability claims that Canadians are making. And so that is the #1 issue now. And it was not in the past the #1 issue for short-term disability claims.
Great, thank you so much. That was terrific.
Thank you.
Stick around with us, Alana, because we want to bring you back for some questions, but we'll also have a chance to hear from Nisha and what Nisha's 3 top trends for 2022 are. And just before I introduce her, I just want to say that, yeah, some great activity in the chat. Keep it coming. I see that people are sharing some resources in there. Awesome. Let's make sure that we keep it dynamic. We love hearing your reactions, and it helps us to pivot and make sure that we continue to be relevant here. So next up, we have Nisha Agarwal. She's the Director of Sustainability for Quadrille Property Group. And Nisha spends a good portion of her time promoting green building certificates and developing programs to streamline and integrate sustainability initiatives with operations at Quadrille International. She has deep expertise in this universe of commercial real estate, beginning her career initially in finance at Bentel Kennedy, and then working her way up through successive sustainability roles. So we're really fortunate to have you here, Nisha, and are really interested in what 3 trends you're looking at this year.
Thanks so much, Lior, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to try and build a little bit on what Alana spoke about in terms of the net zero trend, and also try to weave these 3 themes together as best I can. So really my thought around net zero, there's been, in recent years, there's been several events. I kind of would start with Greta. She's raised awareness on the climate emergency. That's then was followed by the George Floyd and Black Lives Matter movement, and more recently, especially here in BC, the residential school discoveries that have been taking place over the last few months and year. So all of these trends, in my opinion, they've really raised the collective awareness of everyone in society and around the world. So really, I think that there's a way to show how all of these trends are kind of all connected and related to each other. So really, the net zero goal that lots of companies, these stats that you're seeing on the screen, they're from the Climate Action 100 plus. It started with 100 investors. It's now skyrocketed. There's over 600, representing 65 trillion in assets under management. It just tells the story. This is not really a trend that's started in 2022 or becoming more prominent in 2022, but it certainly is ramping up. More and more companies are starting to make claims, and I'm not really sure whether these claims are completely transparent or whether companies are just performing a marketing exercise. So that action remains to be seen. But at the end of the day, it's in my opinion, a big, hairy, audacious goal. I really think that it's going to be a collective effort between businesses, between people, and between society to make these changes happen. And that really leads into the green bond aspect. So a lot of the technological improvements and changes that are going to be required in order for companies and businesses to meet their net zero goals, they're going to come from technology, a lot of them. And technology can be scary. It's new, it might not be tested. It's going to be something that people will just have to have some faith and take a chance on. So green bonds provide for a lot of businesses, they're able to provide that extra bit of financing that may not have been otherwise achievable from an economics perspective. The numbers just might not work. Green bonds provide that kind of aspect that allows some projects to proceed because the finances make sense. So I think the fact that globally the green bond market is anticipated to reach $1 trillion or to cross $1 trillion this year is quite phenomenal. It represents around a 600% growth in the last 5 years. So that's speaks for itself. And at the end of the day, in order for us to get to the net zero goal that everyone is striving for, we need the aspect of finance, which is coming from the green bonds. We also need the piece of, yes, I would include sustainability linked bonds in the green bond bucket. So hopefully that answered the question there. And so the second piece, the economics, the funding, that piece is a big, huge part. The other part is people. At the end of the day, we're not going to be able to reach that big, hairy, audacious goal if we don't have everyone along with us and everyone still being part of the journey to get to net zero. So that's where we need creativity. We need to have everyone committed to that overall cause, and we need to be able to ensure that it's done in a way that respects everybody, that keeps everyone engaged, and helps us to achieve that net zero goal. Lior, am I passing it back to you?
Yes, sorry, I wasn't sure if you had more there, but Nisha, that was excellent. Thank you, and I think you've done a good job of framing clearly what people at the outset said, predicted was also top of mind for them, but took us a little further in terms of how that plays out. And Ted, I'd like to invite you now to bring us home on this and help us understand what trends you're looking at. I know that it will dovetail on some of what others have said, but maybe go a little bit further as well. So I'm going to introduce you to Ted before I hand over the reins to him, because as I said, he's got a very unique role because he's the managing director at CBSR, but he also plays a very unique role as Chief Sustainability Officer for the constellation of organizations. So we're partnered with the Delphi Group, Globe, and Leading Change Canada, and he acts as the Chief Sustainability Officer for all of those organizations. So him and I get to work closely, and so lucky me, I get to learn from his 25 plus years of experience as the former president of the Delphi Group and his work with leading edge companies, governments, and strategic initiatives across several different sectors in Canada. Ted, over to you. Tell us what 3 trends you're looking at that will rock 2022.
Great, thanks very much. Just confirming you can hear me, Lior?
Absolutely.
Oh, good, great. Well, first of all, I thought Nisha might have been just talking about looking forward to having people back in office buildings as Quadrio. And we're all excited to be in person together. And if it means we're in a very green quadrille building, I'll be pretty excited about it. That is one trend that maybe is underlying all of the interest we have in reconnecting as in person as humans in more ways than we have in the last few years. I certainly am. And so absolutely, there's some good overlap here between what the three of us are seeing as priorities. Before I get into mine, I just wanted to say I'm also thrilled to see we've got well over 100, close to 200 folks joining us today. It's just so wonderful to have so many engaged people, on these issues, experts in these topics. And it's what the CBSR community is all about for Canada. This is how we're trying to advance important issues in our country. So for me, you see the three there. What I want to emphasize is not just the points for each, but the connectivity between all three of them. And that's what interests me in particular about these three areas. So to start, climate and ESG targets. As Leor said, you may all be so surprised, Ted, looking at you, how could you have spent 25 years working in this field? I swear it's my only career to date. The amazing thing to me with that experience that I have is the establishment of targets, real targets, credible targets, rigorous targets, largely by companies. For too many years, we saw companies say ambitious things, propose to do ambitious things, and it just simply could not survive the test of time and cost pressures. And so now we're seeing targets established, and the targets are bound by scientific frameworks like the Science-Based Target Initiative on climate change. There are others for other sustainability issues, and SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. It is creating rigor and robustness to commitments, and that's what we've desperately needed. We've needed action, and the poll results showing the importance of interim net zero targets. We can't wait till 2049 and then offset our way to a stabilized climate. We have to focus on interim targets and action now. And so that is really exciting. And the fact, again, that the ability with improved science, improved rigor, improved data, we've been able to deliver sectoral targets, company-specific targets, and then seeing ESG, this relates to the green bonds point that Nisha was making. We're seeing sustainable finance required as part of a target framework, or them working together. And that is what we need to make this advancement in commitment levels in their own right sustainable. And there's some good data there from SBTI in terms of the increase of these targets. So how does it relate to procurement and truth and reconciliation? Well, once an organization has an established ESG target, a climate change target, one that is rigorous and fulsome, you instantly start to think about other issues that are related to it and have relevance to your targets. And when you take a target seriously, you start to look at these other related areas with more interest and more detail. And so sustainable procurement, how is your supply chain, your value chain? If you have a net zero target as an organization, you have to be looking at your value chain, upstream and downstream. And so that means that the much ballyhooed topic of scope 3 and greenhouse gas accounting is your supply chain, and your indirect impacts becomes important. And things like circular economy, all of a sudden product, packaging, manufacturing processes, they all have carbon, embodied carbon, or sustainability issues associated with them. You have to look at all those things differently because it's related to your target. And social aspects of procurement are also important. Indigenous, and I'll speak to this in a minute, Indigenous reconciliation, Indigenous engagement, diversity and inclusion, human rights, all these topics are very relevant to sustainable procurement. And our most recent CBSR public report released just before the holidays in December showed that government, as an important player in this field of sustainable procurement, could be doing a lot more in Canada. And we've already been engaging with governments at different levels, provincial and federal, about the results of that work. And if the feds and the provincial governments, municipal are actually a standout amongst the three levels. If they start acting more intently in this area, it has a value chain effect as well. Third area, business commitment to Indigenous truth and reconciliation. And we are not experts in this field at CBSR. We are trying and we want to become more active in this area because it is so important to Canada. As Leora mentioned, one of our board members, Annie, gives us wonderful direction on this topic, reminds me that it's not just about reconciliation, Ted, it's about truth first. And I am trying to take those lessons and figure out how we engage on this topic in more explicit and intentional ways through CBSR. So for businesses, we're seeing reconciliation action plans being released publicly. It's a fantastic development. Our caution is not something to brag about. TRC recommendations have been around, as Leora said, for 7 years. So this is not a point of marketing or branding. This is a point of being honest and being open to learning and being intentional. And that's how companies in Canada, we believe businesses in Canada need to approach this. And without a doubt, though, they need to engage on this whole area of Indigenous truth and reconciliation and see the amazing opportunities, not just for social considerations, but for legitimate, genuine economic opportunities that it can provide our country. It's an amazing area to get into and see both the honest pieces that we need to reconciliate with, and then also the great opportunities and positive energy we can get from engaging. So for us, it leads to sustainable procurement as well. Many Canadian corporate leaders do have Indigenous engagement elements in their procurement, and they are just starting, and there's more to be done, but it's a great opportunity area. So those are the three topics that I'm excited about in 2022, and I'll leave it there and look forward to questions.
Thanks so much, Ted. Yeah, some really good stuff. I like that how you tied all those together, and looks like from the comments that resonated with people. And the good news is that there's lots of questions, so I do want to get to them. And I'll, as you know, my prerogative as the moderator, I'll start off with one of my own that is kind of burning for me. But as I'm asking my question, do take a moment to not just put it in the chat, as I see some of you have, but actually put it in the Q&A that you'd see on the bottom of your screen there, and we'll prioritize it. But this is, I would just like to invite Alana and Nisha to turn your videos and audio on as well. Great, here we all are. I just want to make sure that we're not leaving this conversation without also recognizing that it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? Although I think for many of us who've been working in this space a long time, we're seeing such momentum and it's exciting. But at the same time, there is a risk and frankly, a growing, some mounting pushback that's taking place against ESG progress. And for those of you that are following some of the international sustainable business news, perhaps you're already looking at what's happening at Unilever, a company that's widely recognized as a leader in this space, but some of the activist shareholders who hold that company's stock, they're just not buying into what they call this silly idea of purpose and sustainability. They say that management is overly obsessed with publicly displaying sustainability credentials at the expense of focusing on fundamental or business fundamentals. So this is a general question for the panel, and invite any of you who want to take it. What do you make of this sort of ideological debate over the meaning of value creation and perhaps more broadly, capitalism and the point of it itself?
Leora, I'm happy to start.
Please.
Yeah, so I mean, I think in my opinion, the real issue is the transparency and genuine genuineness of people and companies when they're making these types of claims. And that's something that we certainly struggle with in commercial real estate specifically, but also in sustainability in general. Is, yeah, you're right, we're going to make these claims and we're going to do all these wonderful things, but they're 50 years out or they're 30 years out. I'll probably be dead by then. Does it really matter? Is anyone going to hold me accountable? So I think really that's the crux of it. Is if we aren't able to make impactful changes and provide a clear path of how we're going to achieve things, that's what's going to create this pushback and the unbelievability that people feel is starting to take place in certain actions.
Yeah, good points. Please,
I can
Elena.
just add in, Leah. I mean, I think Nisha, you're right. That's the heart of it is that piece. But I mean, I also think it's great, to get some pushback in this space because, this idea, whatever concept, whether it's triple bottom line or shared value, this idea that there is another way to measure value beyond financial returns and financial considerations is at the heart of what we're trying to do in sustainability, to be honest, right? As it could have started out as, marketing or managing our ESG risks, but it's moving into this place of purpose and value creation and embedding it into the business, which is where Sun Life is focused. And it is a journey. It's not something that we know perfectly how to do, but I think for me personally, it is a deeply held belief that even if we don't get it right, being committed to this journey, to creating value beyond financial value through what you do as a core business is incredibly important. And so I see these conversations as just a good way to have that conversation. If there's pushback on that, that's great. Let's have that conversation, because for too long we've been focused on one metric of value.
Leora, this is a perfect way for me an excuse for me to ask for the Doug Ford slide to come up.
I wasn't sure if that was gonna make it into the presentation. All right.
Okay, I'll explain it. I was shocked this week. Maybe some of you saw this as well. Doug Ford and Hamilton in front of big rolls of steel. And he is talking about the decarbonization of the automotive supply chain and a clean steel initiative, investment of some sort into Fasco, and how it relates to attracting investment from leading auto manufacturers to Ontario to build their electric cars with clean steel. And he used the words it was either to decarbonize the supply chain or something to that effect. And I was just shocked and I was pleased. I'm sorry it's sort of taken this long for his politics to come to this conclusion, but I was thrilled it finally happened. And to that point, I bring up this point because it relates to your Unilever. Yeah, and I agree with like challenge is good. Challenge is great. We have an amazing momentum as it relates to the business case, the classic question, what's the business case for all this stuff? And to geek out for a minute, for years, we tried to find the causality between doing good and good results for business. And it was really hard. Now we have ESG and this presumption of correlation. There's just this presumption that if you're active on ESG, your business results will be better, lower risk, more opportunity, a better engaged team. I love that assumption of a positive correlation. But it's up to us now as experts to get even better and specify the causality. And Mr. Ford gave us a great example.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that forward. And I want to create a segue to one of the questions from Donna Jones here. And I think, Elena, this maybe speaks as well to one of the trends that you were talking about with regards to taking a stance. Her question is, how prepared are Canadian CEOs to speak to complex issues? We know they need to, but is the leadership moxie there? And so maybe I'll just ask you to kind of start, Elena, just because I know that it did dovetail with one of the trends. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can speak on behalf of all CEOs and corporations. I can certainly tell you, Sun Life CEO Kevin is very willing to speak to these issues. But I think it's the same as the muscle that we talk about within companies and within society. We have to get comfortable sometimes with saying the wrong thing, right? It's very easy to come out and take a stance, or it's not very easy, but say you work really hard and you come out with a position related to something. Not everyone's going to be happy with that, right? So it's easier to come out and not say something. But so we have to be prepared for criticism, and that can be tough, right? And that has real impacts when it comes to your shareholders, your clients, that broader set of stakeholders that you have to think through. So I like to, think about it in terms of it's a muscle we have to develop. We have to, as a society, collectively, create a safe space to potentially say the wrong thing and not jump on it. So while the CEOs in the corporate space have to get comfortable doing this, I think there's also incumbent on broader society to welcome those positions and perhaps sometimes take a breath with what we see with some reactions. But it's tough, right? And this is really individual, really personal. There are, corporations are made up of more than just CEOs. There are a lot of executives that can also take positions on things, but it is a really important muscle for CEOs to develop.
Yeah, thank you for responding to that. I don't know if there's another burning addition there, but I do want to make sure I get to this question from Peter Polanowski. And I think this speaks to probably something that many of us are following with regards to the international financial reporting standards and this whole idea of convergence. And so his question is, what do you see as the risks and benefits behind the trend for greater standardization regarding ESG disclosures? And maybe, Nisha, I'll just invite you to maybe speak to that from your experience.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think that you said it, it's got risks and it's got opportunities. I think the biggest opportunity is that finally there will be some standardization. That's something that we certainly struggle with as landlords if we're trying to collect data from tenants, for example, especially in the international portfolio. It's all over the place. And if you're trying to consolidate that and you're trying to report that out as an organization, it's very difficult. It's very, very difficult. So I actually am somewhat looking forward to the standardization that may be created, and hopefully it's done right. So it actually does add value. And then on the risk side, you can't paint the whole world with one brush. So that's kind of, I think, going to be the biggest risk on that front is, will it be nuanced enough to be able to include everyone, but will also it maintain that standardization so it adds the value and people can actually make decisions based on the information that's collected.
Yeah, great comments. Anybody else want to add to that as well?
Well, I'll just add one little for example, which I think is helpful. Currently we have, in Canada, we have a proposed instrument for making TCFD mandatory, the CSA proposed instrument, and it currently doesn't recommend scenario analysis as part of the instrument, but we have the ISSB climate prototype that does recommend scenario analysis. So we're starting to see, that those risks are really emerging right now as we talk about standardization, where different regulatory or global standards might have different pieces of the puzzle. And that just makes it complicated for companies in terms of disclosure and the processes and procedures in place. So, as we, convergence is going to be messy, I think, for a little while till we get there.
Quick follow-up question for you, Alana, because what you just said about the requirement around scenario analysis speaks to that other trend that you brought up around mandatory disclosure. So putting aside standardization for a moment, talking about legally mandating that companies actually disclose their climate risks. What do you see as how can governments get this right? It seems like there's a willingness to do it. Two of two of the senior federal government ministers, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and Minister of Finance, have this in their ministerial mandate letters. So clearly a very specific agenda there. But there's a way to get it wrong, right? So what would you say is some of the key, I don't know, recipe items that are required to do this well?
The first is to do it. Right? That's the first way they'll get it wrong. Like, let's go. This has been around long enough now. Let's all start reporting to TCFD. So that's sort of my first quick glib answer. You know, I think there are a lot of really great processes well established in public policy around, you know, creating principles-based frameworks that allow companies space to disclose what makes sense for their business. I think also strong consultation, you know, providing things out with good consultation periods that allow companies time to respond and wade through those nuggets of technical issues, because there's a lot of people across the organization that have to be brought together to weigh in on these things. Providing, you know, grandfathered time to give companies time to get to the standard, particularly if there are going to be, you know, practices that aren't as evolved like scenario analysis. Give companies time to move towards that, not, you know, make it right now. And then, of course, provide support to smaller or medium-sized companies that don't have the capacity potentially to do that. So I think there's a lot of tools available in government tool belts, but I would say the first is let's start, let's get it done. And then the rest, there are a lot of practices available to help us get there in a way that makes sense.
I like it. Just do it. Yeah, good advice. I'd like to change gears a little bit here and to bring forward Michael Chang's question, which is a question for everybody here. We've talked about disclosure. We've talked about a number of issues here. We haven't talked a lot about energy transition, and so I think Michael's question speaks to that. He says, for the E and ESG, with the large-scale investments in renewable energy by sovereign funds of a couple $billion, when will we see a planet shift towards this type of energy source as opposed to being reliant on sort of the incumbents, the fossil fuels? And I wanted to, Ted, get your thoughts, because I know you've got a lot of interface with that clean tech world. What's your thoughts on what Michael's asking about here?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, when will these transition efforts, investments start to make a difference as it relates to the impact on the climate? Well, I mean, a couple places to look, and we do a lot of scenario analysis with large energy companies and new energy. You see the data on new electricity generation, absolute dominance of renewable energy. So that's a very important indicator of impact of all this effort and all that money. Renewables, the cost of capital is the way to make money in renewables, and the cost of capital staying low and them being able to access a lot of funds is critical to be able to actually put projects in the ground. You're seeing, I just saw today, several coal shutdowns in Australia because they can't compete with the price of renewables. I mean, I love hearing it. It's amazing that we're finally at that day. Natural gas, that's an important area. You know, it's been heralded as a transition to a low carbon future. There's the question around how much it continues to be used and for how long. That's a big factor to watch. Energy efficiency, just transition issues in terms of society being able to, one of the problems in scenarios, when you look, it's exciting to see all the clean energy, but the prices really suck from a societal energy just transition to a low carbon economy. So this is an area that's going, and hopefully that lower cost for renewables will ultimately mean that this supposed premium to get to a low carbon energy system won't be as significant, and we can manage this from a cost for everybody in society point of view. So those are a few things I think of. It is extremely exciting. but it's also scary because that, can this disruption happen fast enough and in a way that doesn't create, again, a lot of difficulties for different parts of society that don't have as much disposable income for this really what is an essential service is energy. So those are some of the things I think of.
You've given a lot there, Ted. So I just want to encourage you, like, sort of in sort of like 15 words or less, kind of like, what do you see as kind of like the next step to overcome a lot of those challenges that you've just described, whether it's regarding price or whether it's regarding the scale?
Well, I think all those things will come together to hopefully create a situation where clean, renewable energy, clean energy for all forms of energy need, transportation, homes, buildings, heating, all the things we use energy for, that clean energy option is there, it's competitive, and it's proven. And then across the different ways in our economy we use energy, and then we're going to be on a great path. But a lot of things have to be done for that to work.
Thank you. Yeah, good summation there. I want to make sure that we also get to this question from Sarah Kitzler. And thank you for all of your questions. There's lots of meaningful ones here, and I'm so sorry we won't be able to have time to get to all of them. But I want to maybe revisit this to drive this home, because Nisha, you in particular spoke to that issue of greenwashing, making sure that the data is real, that there's an authentic approach. Sarah asks, are you nervous that the rise in CSR, ESG initiatives is going to create a rise in performative and greenwashing initiatives? And how, as consumers, are we going to be able to tell the difference between a true social impact initiative and one that's just being done for status or marketing?
Yeah, that's a great question and a really tough one. So I'm going to do my best to try to respond. And I think as consumers, it really is very difficult to try to figure out who's real and who's not. You can only get so far by digging through the internet and seeing what people have posted and what reports are out there and what actually seems to be happening on the ground. It's really hard to do. So I don't really think I have a good answer for that. It's just going to be tough. And I think as companies come out and make claims and put information out there, it's really just going to be incumbent on us to try to ask questions and keep pushing them to give evidence and be transparent and share data where it's possible. Yeah, I think that's.
Nisha, thank you for attempting to answer a tough question there. But it gets closer to home in your industry. I guess would you see some low-hanging fruits that are kind of like, well, if we're not at least doing this, then I don't think we'll have the credibility to talk about these other really bold things. What do you see as like an example of low-hanging fruit in your industry?
Yeah, I think the very first one is that disclosure piece. I mean, there's something to be said about putting your building's energy consumption information out into the world. At the end of the day, that's not a trade secret. That's not your competitive edge. So we as an organization, we have shared our building performance out into the world. You can go onto our website and see how an office building in Calgary performs. And I'm always amazed when we try to encourage our peers across the country or in other places to try and do the same. There seems to be some hesitancy. And to me, that is the low-hanging fruit. What's the big secret? Just tell people how efficient your building is or isn't. And at the end of the day, that's your starting point to make those improvements and actually have impact. So I think that's probably what I would say as a starting point, especially for our industry.
I wouldn't mind jumping in with a
Please,
couple of
Alana.
quick points on this, if I may, Leor. I think, you know, one to say that the pressure is real, right? And as a company that just recently went through setting our own net zero commitments, you know, that leads to a lot of introspection. And I think that's where, you know, speaking to the 100+ professionals on this call today and all of ourselves, I think that's where we all collectively play a really important role as, you know, a challenge function in our organizations, a conscience, and asking those questions. Is this marketing, or is this real? Is this authentic? And, you know, I can tell you that, you know, when Sun Life was making its net zero commitment, we had really tough conversations about that, because you do want to be, you know, out supporting part of the solution, putting a stake in the ground, because if you don't come out and say something and push towards getting it measured and tracked and disclosed, you know, then the opposite might happen. You might never come out and say something. So, you know, we really do, you know, at least at Sun Life perspective, we really grappled with this, and it is an increasingly important theme. We're seeing regulators in the US and the SEC also tackle greenwashing. So I think that's an important role for regulators as well, and governments. And that's, again, it feels like every answer comes back to disclosure. To Nisha's point, is where it comes back to disclosure. But yeah, I do think for this group and the ESG professionals in particular, this is a very, very important theme that we all have to be, you know, working really hard to address.
Thank you, Alana. Ted, any final words before we move to the wrap up here? You get the last word.
Well, I just came off a paper versus plastic paper week presentation. And so, you know, the life cycle analysis debate between, you know, these things are still happening and they should be happening. And I think, you know, I support what my fellow panelists were saying. Like, you know, we're not going to perfect this, but it doesn't mean we can't keep working on it and keep thinking about authenticity and impact. And it behooves us all as professionals in the space to continue to move forward, accept criticism, but know that we're all trying to advance and improve on these various topics. And so it takes that kind of attitudinal approach to it. And yeah, continue to ask questions, but also say, hey, good job when somebody's made some progress.
Thank you, Ted. I think those are good final words there. I'm hearing, you didn't use this language, but I'm hearing the need for authenticity and humility in all of that. So I think that's just a good reminder. This is now the part of the show where I get to say thank you, and I just want to thank all of you who are watching this webinar. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. And of course, thank you to our speakers, Alana Boyd from Sun Life, Nisha Agarwal from QuadReal, and Ted Ferguson from CBSR, Delphi Globe Leading Change. Here's a summary or a reminder of the 9 trends that will rock 2022, according to our experts today. Alana talked to us about mental health and wellness, companies getting more involved in thorny political issues or taking a stance on those, as well as mandatory climate-related disclosure. Nisha talked to us about a continued push to net zero with her experience in buildings as a case study. She talked about green bonds, sustainability bonds, transition bonds, and basically climate finance solutions, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then Ted added 3 more. He talked about the role of business in Indigenous reconciliation, net zero targets, and focusing on interim objectives or 2030 targets on the way to 2050, as well as sustainable procurement and how it actually supports the first 2. Let us know in the chat if you agree with these 9 trends that have been presented to you today. How does that resonate for you? And If you heard about this webinar through a friend or colleague and not directly, do sign up for our newsletter so you can get a heads up about the next webinar. And as I said at the beginning, we're going to take actually another 30 minutes right now. So we're going to close this section and stay for another 30 minutes so that we're going to give our members a sneak peek or actually a deeper dive into CBSR's 2022 programming. And again, if you're interested, if you're considering becoming a CBSR member, I invite you to also stick around, ask some questions. We'll have a discussion, and happy to lift the hood and tell you all of the exciting things that we've got planned in the year ahead. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.